I'm 68 years old. For 40 years, I've been flying over the same coordinates in the Alaskan wilderness every winter. And for 40 years, I've seen the same massive figure watching my plane from below. I never reported it, not once, until today. My name is Robert Callahan. Most people call me Rob. I spent 4 decades as a bush pilot in Alaska, flying supply runs, emergency evacuations, and research teams into places where roads don't exist and cell towers are a fantasy. It's a job that demands precision under pressure and an unshakable trust in your instruments. You see a lot of things up there. Wildlife migrations that look like rivers of fur and antler. Northern lights that make you question whether you're still on Earth. Weather systems that roll in so fast they can turn a routine flight into a fight for survival. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what I saw on December 14th, 1984. I was 28 years old, fresh out of the Air Force, trying to make a living in civilian aviation. Alaska seemed like the right move. Wide open skies, good pay, and enough isolation that my past didn't follow me. I'd been flying bush routes for about 6 months at that point, mostly small hops between Fairbanks and the mining camps scattered across the interior. That December morning, the temperature hit minus 44 degrees Fahrenheit before sunrise. Cold enough that your breath freezes midair, and exposed skin goes numb in under a minute. I was scheduled for a supply run to a geological survey camp about 190 miles north of Fairbanks. Standard cargo, medical supplies, food, fuel, canisters, mail. The kind of run I could do, half asleep. I took off at 7:42 a.m. The sun was just starting to crack the horizon, painting the snow-covered mountains in shades of orange and purple. Visibility was perfect. Not a cloud in the sky. My Cessna 185 handled like a dream, and for the first hour, everything was routine. I followed the river valleys north, keeping an eye on my fuel gauge and scanning for any signs of weather moving in. Around 9:15 a.m., I was crossing over a ridge system about 30 miles south of my destination. The coordinates were 66.4792 N. 150.1356 W. I remember them because I've written them down in my personal notebook at least 200 times since then. The terrain below was rugged, frozen lakes, dense spruce forests, and long stretches of tundra that looked like white desert. No settlements, no roads, no signs of human life, just wilderness that stretched in every direction. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was a bear. We see them out there all the time, especially in the fall, before they hibernate. But this was December, middle of winter. Bears should have been deep in their dens by then, and this thing wasn't moving like a bear. It was standing upright. I dropped altitude slightly, maybe down to 1,200 feet, just to get a better look. I told myself it was a trick of the light. A shadow from the trees, maybe even a stump. But as I got closer, the details came into focus. It was massive, easily 8 feet tall, maybe more, covered in dark brown fur that looked thick and matted, broad shoulders that tapered into a narrow waist, arms that hung too long, almost to its knees, and it wasn't moving. It was just standing there on a frozen ridgeline, completely exposed to the cold, watching my plane pass overhead. No survival gear, no camp, no fire, nothing that would explain how something that size could be out there in minus 44 degrees Fahrenheit temperatures without freezing to death. I circled back. I don't know why I did it. Curiosity, maybe, or disbelief. I needed to see it again. Needed to confirm that my eyes weren't playing tricks on me. But by the time I completed the turn and came back around, it was gone. Vanished into the trees. No tracks visible from the air. No movement, just empty ridge. My hands were shaking on the controls. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. I checked my instruments. Everything normal. No altitude sickness. No hypoxia. I'd had plenty of coffee that morning, so it wasn't exhaustion. I saw what I saw. I finished the supply run, landed at the geological camp, unloaded the cargo, smiled and made small talk with the researchers like nothing had happened. But inside, my mind was racing. What the hell was that? A hermit? Impossible. No one survives out there without serious gear. A hallucination. I'd never had one before. Some kind of wildlife I didn't recognize. But what wildlife stands upright like that? When I got back to Fairbanks that evening, I sat in my apartment with my logbook open. I'd documented the flight like always. Departure time, altitude, weather, coordinates, but nowhere in that logbook did I mention what I'd seen on that ridge. I told myself it was a one-time thing, a fluke, something I'd forget about in a few weeks. But that night, lying in bed, I kept seeing it, that massive figure, standing still, watching me. And deep down, I knew it wasn't the last time. I didn't fly that route again for 3 weeks. My company rotated pilots through different regions, and I got assigned to coastal runs for most of January. But I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen. Late at night, I'd pull out sectional maps and stare at those coordinates. NA 150.1356W, middle of nowhere. No settlements within 40 miles. No hiking trails. No reason for anyone to be out there. I started asking questions. Casual questions. The kind that wouldn't raise eyebrows. I'd sit in the pilot lounge at Fairbanks International, drinking bad coffee, and mention bear sightings to the other bush pilots. Anyone ever see anything weird out by the Koyukok drainage? I'd ask. Most guys would shrug. A few would tell stories about moose acting strange or wolves following their planes. Nobody mentioned anything like what I'd seen. One older pilot, a guy named Dutch Morrison, who'd been flying Alaska since the 1960s, looked at me a little too long when I brought it up. He didn't say anything. Just gave me this look that said, "Don't go down that road, kid." Then he changed the subject. February 9th, 1985. That was the second time I was flying a medical evacuation run. A miner at a remote camp had broken his leg, and I was bringing a paramedic in to stabilize him for transport. Different route than the December flight, but it passed within 5 miles of those same coordinates. It was late afternoon. Temperature had dropped to minus 38 degrees Fahrenheit. Sun was already starting to set, turning the sky that deep purple blue you only see in the Arctic winter. I was at 2,000 feet, following a frozen river system, when I saw movement on the ground below. Same ridgeline, same area. I checked my GPS. Less than half a mile from where I'd seen it the first time, and there it was again. This time it was walking, long, deliberate strides across an open snowfield. I dropped to 1,500 feet without thinking, ignoring the paramedic's confused look. The figure stopped, turned, and looked directly up at my plane. I could see its face, not clearly. The light was fading, but I could make out a heavy brow, a broad flat nose, eyes that reflected the last bit of daylight. It watched me for maybe 5 seconds. Then it turned and walked into the tree line. Casual, unhurried, like my presence didn't concern it at all. The paramedic tapped my shoulder. "Everything okay, Captain?" I nodded. "Yeah, just thought I saw something." "What did you see?" "Caribou," I lied. That night, back in my apartment, I started a second logbook, a personal one. Black composition notebook I bought at a drugstore. I wrote down everything: dates, times, coordinates, weather conditions, what I'd seen, how long I'd seen it, which direction it moved. I didn't know what I was documenting, but some instinct told me to keep records. Entry 1. December 14th, 1984. 9:17 a.m. Coordinates 66.4792. NA 150.1356. WY minus 44 degrees Fahrenheit. Clear skies. Subject stationary on ridge. Upright posture. Approximately 8 feet tall. Dark brown fur. No visible gear or shelter. Entry to February 9th, 1985. 4:33 PMA coordinates NA 150.1423W minus 38 degrees Fahrenheit. Clear skies. Subject walking across snowfield. Made eye contact with aircraft. Retreated into forest after approximately 5 seconds. I kept that notebook locked in a fireproof safe under my bed. I didn't tell anyone about it. Not friends, not family, not the other pilots. Because I was starting to realize something that made my stomach turn. If I reported this, they'd ground me. Psychological evaluation. Maybe permanent disqualification from flying. The FAA doesn't take kindly to pilots who see things that don't exist. And officially, scientifically, what I was seeing didn't exist. So I stayed quiet. March passed without incident. Then, April. I flew dozens of routes, but none of them took me near those coordinates. Part of me was relieved. Another part, the part I didn't want to admit existed, was disappointed. May 22nd, 1985. Third sighting. Early morning supply run to a fish and wildlife research station. I wasn't even supposed to be on that route. Another pilot called in sick, and I took his shift. The flight path cut right through the area. This time, I saw it from 3,000 feet, standing on the bank of a partially thawed river. And it wasn't alone. There were two of them. The larger one, the one I'd seen before, was bent down near the water. The second one, smaller, maybe 7 feet tall, with lighter colored fur, stood a few yards back. I watched through binoculars as the larger one reached into the river and pulled out what looked like a fish. It handed the fish to the smaller one. They were working together, hunting together, or maybe teaching. The way the larger one demonstrated, then stepped back while the smaller one tried. It reminded me of how my father taught me to fish when I was a kid. I circled once, a slow, wide circle that wouldn't seem unusual if anyone checked my flight path later. They didn't run this time. They watched me, calm, patient. Then they picked up their catch and walked into the forest, side by side. That night, I added a third entry to my notebook, and beneath it, I wrote a single line that I underlined 3 times. There's more than one. This isn't random. The pattern started to emerge over the next 2 years. Every time I flew within 10 miles of those coordinates, between November and April, when temperatures dropped below minus 30 degrees Fahrenheit, I saw them. Not every single time, but often enough that it stopped feeling like coincidence. Winter 1986, 4 sightings. Winter 1987, 6 sightings. Winter 1988, 7 sightings. I developed protocols. I'd fly those routes during optimal visibility. I'd bring cameras with telephoto lenses. I'd document cloud cover, wind speed, exact time of day. I became obsessive about it. My personal logbook grew thicker. More entries, more details. Sketches of what I saw. Maps with sighting locations marked. I noticed things. Patterns within the pattern. They stayed within a 5-mile radius. Always the same general area. They were most active during dawn and dusk. They avoided open ground during midday. When temperatures dropped below minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit, I'd see tracks, but not the creatures themselves. Like they had shelter somewhere. Caves, maybe, where they'd wait out the worst cold. They moved in pairs or small groups, usually 2 or 3. I never saw one completely alone after that first December sighting. And they were always doing something purposeful. Hunting, gathering. Once, I'm pretty sure I saw them constructing something, stacking branches in a deliberate formation near a cliff face. I also noticed something that bothered me more than anything else. They knew the sound of my plane. By 1989, when I'd approach that area, I'd see them looking up before I was even overhead, like they recognized the engine pitch. The Cessna 185 has a distinctive sound, and I flew the same aircraft most of the time. They'd learned it. One afternoon in January 1990, I swear, one of them waved at me. Not a friendly wave, more like an acknowledgement. A "yeah, we see you too" gesture. I almost crashed trying to process that. The close call started around 1991. I was flying a researcher into a remote site when she pointed out the window and said, "Is that a person down there?" My blood went cold. We were passing right over the ridge where I'd seen them dozens of times. And yes, there was one standing in plain sight about 800 feet below us. "Where?" I said, playing dumb. "Right there, on that ridge. It looks huge." I adjusted course slightly, putting us behind a mountain before she could get a better look. "Probably just a moose," I said. "They can look humanoid from certain angles." She frowned. "That didn't look like any moose I've ever seen. Light plays tricks up here. Shadows, reflections off the snow. Your eyes adjust weird at altitude." She didn't seem convinced, but she dropped it. When we landed, she mentioned it to the station chief. He laughed it off. "Yeah, everyone thinks they see Bigfoot their first winter. Wait till you've been here a few years. You'll realize it's just wildlife and wishful thinking." But I saw her looking at me as we flew back, like she knew I'd deflected on purpose. Another close call came in December 1993. I was training a new pilot, a young guy fresh out of flight school named Marcus. We were doing a familiarization run, showing him the major landmarks and routes. I deliberately avoided the area, but weather forced us to reroute. We passed right over at 1,500 feet. Marcus didn't see them, but I did. 3 of them, moving single file across a frozen lake. Clear as day. I tensed up so badly that Marcus noticed. "You okay, Captain?" "Yeah, just cold front moving in. We should head back. Looks clear to me." "Trust me, I've been flying this region for 10 years. I can feel weather before it shows up on instruments." That was a lie. The weather was fine, but I couldn't risk him seeing what I'd seen. By the mid-1990s, I had developed a routine. I knew which routes would take me near the sightings. I knew when to request those routes and when to avoid them. I knew how to explain away anything passengers might see. I kept 2 logbooks, one official, one secret. I lied constantly, to my company, to the FAA, to passengers, to other pilots. And the weight of it was starting to break me. I'd lie awake at night, wondering what the hell I was doing. Was I protecting something important? Or was I just protecting my career? If these creatures were real, didn't the scientific community deserve to know? Didn't wildlife management agencies need to document them, study them, protect their habitat? But every time I convinced myself to report it, I'd remember Dutch Morrison's look, that warning glance in the pilot lounge. I'd think about what happened to people who claimed to see things they couldn't prove. Ridiculed, dismissed, discredited. So I stayed silent, and I kept flying, and I kept seeing them, winter after winter after winter. By 1998, I'd logged 147 sightings in my personal notebook. 147 times I'd seen something that officially didn't exist. 147 times I'd chosen silence over truth. But in 2003, everything changed, because that was the year I didn't just see them from 2,000 feet in the air. That was the year I met one face to face. For 13 years after that forced landing, I kept flying, 211 more drops between February 2010 and December 2023. The old man kept paying. I kept delivering. The Bigfoot colony kept surviving. But everything changed after that night on the ice. I was no longer pretending. I did not know what I was doing. I was actively participating in keeping a secret species alive, and that weight sat differently on my conscience. I started researching everything I could find about Bigfoot. Not the tabloid garbage or the hoax videos. Real research. Scientific papers about primate behavior. Indigenous oral histories. Historical sighting reports that had consistent details across decades and geography. The Patterson-Gimlin film from 1967. The Freeman footage from 1994. The thermal imaging captures from Olympic National Park. Footprint casts analyzed by paleontologists. Hair samples with unknown DNA markers. Hundreds of credible witnesses. Park rangers, Forest Service employees, hunters with decades of wilderness experience. People who had nothing to gain by lying. The evidence was overwhelming once you looked for it. Bigfoot was real. Multiple populations across North America. Reclusive, intelligent, avoiding human contact whenever possible, and apparently suffering from the same diseases that affected humans. Diabetes, infections, injuries that needed surgical intervention. That last part bothered me the most. How did a wild population develop diabetes? That was a disease of modern civilization. Processed foods, sedentary lifestyle, genetic predisposition, combined with environmental factors. Unless they were not entirely wild, unless they had been in contact with human civilization at some point, unless their biology was close enough to human that they developed human diseases, unless they were more like us than we wanted to admit. The old man would not answer those questions. I asked him dozens of times over the years. Where did they come from? How many are there? Why are they sick? How do you know what medicine they need? He always gave me the same answer. You know enough. But I did not know enough. I knew they existed. I knew they needed medicine. I knew I was helping them. But I did not know who they were, how they lived, how many of them depended on these drops. Whether I was helping a small family or an entire community, I needed to see them, really see them, not just a shadow in the forest for 10 seconds. I needed to understand what I had been protecting for 36 years. So in December 2023, I made a decision that would change everything. I installed a trail camera at the drop site. I used a high-end model designed for wildlife research, infrared motion sensor, night vision, weatherproof casing, rated to -60 degrees Fahrenheit, SD card with capacity for thousands of images. I mounted it on one of the triangle trees, angled down at the clearing, camouflaged with bark and branches. The old man did not know. I did not tell him. This felt like a betrayal of trust, but I needed to know. I needed to see. I installed the camera on December 3rd, 2023. During a supply check trip I told the old man was for engine maintenance. I flew to the lake, landed on the ice, hiked to the drop zone, and mounted the camera 15 feet up the tree trunk. Then I flew home and waited. The next drop was scheduled for December 19th, full moon. I loaded the insulated box, flew to the coordinates, pushed the package out at 10:47 p.m., and flew home. Standard procedure. The old man paid me $5,000, same as always. But this time, I could barely sleep, because somewhere on that SD card was footage of Bigfoot, real Bigfoot, retrieving medicine, maybe multiple individuals, maybe families. I waited 2 weeks before flying back to check the camera. January 4th, 2024. I landed on the lake, hiked to the drop zone, and climbed the tree. The camera was still there, untouched. The SD card was full. I took it back to my cabin and plugged it into my laptop with shaking hands. 347 images. 4 video clips. What I saw on those files destroyed any remaining illusions I had about what I had been doing for 37 years. The first images were from December 19th, approximately 2 hours after my drop, 12:52 a.m. According to the timestamp, a single figure appeared at the edge of the clearing. Tall, 8 feet minimum. Broad shoulders, covered in dark reddish-brown hair. Walking upright on 2 legs, with a gait that was almost human, but not quite. The arms were longer. The torso was barrel-shaped. The head sat forward on the shoulders. Bigfoot clear, undeniable, real. The figure approached the insulated box I had dropped. It crouched down, and for the first time, I saw its face in detail. The face was not human, but it was not entirely ape either. The brow ridge was heavy, but not as pronounced as a gorilla. The nose was broad and flat. The eyes were dark and deeply set. The mouth had lips, not just the thin line of a chimpanzee, but the expression. That was what stopped my heart. The expression was intelligent, focused, concerned. This was not an animal looking at food. This was a person assessing a medical supply delivery. The Bigfoot opened the box carefully. It pulled out packages one by one. Insulin vials, antibiotic bottles, bandages, sutures. It examined each item, turning them over in its massive hands, checking labels, even though I do not know if it could read human writing. Then it looked up, directly at the camera. It knew the camera was there. Of course it knew. These beings had been avoiding human detection for centuries. They understood surveillance. They understood cameras. It stared at the lens for maybe 5 seconds. Then it made a decision. It went back to unpacking the box. It was allowing me to watch. It was giving permission. Over the next hour, captured in 63 images, the Bigfoot organized the medical supplies. It separated items into categories. Liquids in one pile, solids in another, bandages and wraps in a third pile. This was not random animal behavior. This was medical inventory management. Then, at 2:17 a.m., others arrived. 3 more figures emerged from the forest, different sizes. The largest was similar to the first one, maybe 7.5 feet tall. The second was shorter, perhaps 6 feet, with lighter brown hair. The third was smaller still, maybe 4 feet tall, moving with the awkward gait of a juvenile. A family, a Bigfoot family, the largest one, I assumed the male, approached the medical supplies. The medium one, likely female, stayed back with the juvenile. The juvenile was curious, trying to move forward, but the female kept gently pulling it back. Protective, maternal. The male picked up one of the insulin vials. He carried it to the female. She took it carefully, examined it, then made a gesture toward the forest, beckoning. Another figure emerged. This one was different, older. The hair was gray around the face and shoulders. The movement was slower, stiffer, and it was thin, unhealthily thin, for a creature that should be massively built. The elder was sick, visibly sick. It walked with a limp, favoring its left side. Its breathing was labored based on how its chest moved. This was a being suffering from chronic illness. The female brought the insulin to the elder. The elder took it and retreated back into the forest with help from the male. Diabetes. The elder had diabetes. And without the insulin I had been delivering, the elder would have died years ago. The video clips showed more. The second clip was from December 27th, 8 days after the drop. This time, 6 individuals appeared, adults and juveniles. One of the adults had a bandaged arm, fresh bandages, white gauze wrapped around the forearm from wrist to elbow. Someone had been injured and received treatment. The third clip was from January 2nd. 9 individuals. This time, I saw something that made me cry. A female carrying an infant. Not a juvenile. An infant, tiny, maybe 2 feet tall, clinging to its mother's chest. A Bigfoot baby, born recently, alive because its mother had access to prenatal vitamins and antibiotics that prevented infection during birth. The fourth clip was from January 4th, just hours before I arrived to retrieve the camera. This clip showed the most individuals yet. 12 Bigfoot, different ages, different sizes, gathering in a clearing. This was not a family. This was a colony, a community, multiple family groups living together, supporting each other, sharing resources, and all of them dependent on the medicine drops I had been making for 37 years. I watched the footage over and over. I studied every frame. I counted injuries. At least 3 individuals with visible bandaging. 1 with a splint on its leg. 2 elders who moved like they had chronic pain, likely arthritis. The diabetic elder who appeared in multiple clips, clearly dependent on regular insulin. These were not healthy wild animals. These were being genetic conditions, injuries that needed human medical intervention. And somehow, someone had been providing that intervention for decades. Maybe longer than I had been flying. The old man had been doing this for a long time before he hired me in 1987. How long? How many Bigfoot had he saved? How many generations had he kept alive? I tried to calculate the medical needs based on what I saw. 12 individuals visible on camera. But cameras only capture what comes into frame. There could be more. Easily 20 or 30, maybe 50. All of them hidden in the Brooks Range. All of them surviving winter after winter because someone was delivering medicine, because I was delivering medicine. I thought about what would happen if I stopped flying, if I died. If the drops ended, the diabetic elder would die within weeks. The injured would develop infections. The sick would deteriorate. The infant might not survive its first winter without proper nutrition, supplements. The entire colony could collapse within a year. I was not just delivering medicine. I was preventing extinction. I was keeping the last remnants of a species alive. That realization crushed me. These beings had no one else. No doctors. No hospitals. No medical system. Just an old man paying a bush pilot to drop packages in the wilderness once a month during winter. What kind of existence was that? What kind of species survives on charity? What kind of world do we live in where intelligent beings have to hide in the frozen mountains and depend on secret medicine drops to avoid dying out? I thought about going public, showing the footage, proving Bigfoot existed, finally giving them protection under endangered species laws. But I knew what would happen. The world would panic. Hunters would flood the area. Scientists would want to capture specimens. The government would quarantine the region. And in the chaos, the colony would scatter, disappear, lose access to the medicine they needed. Going public would kill them faster than staying silent. So I made a choice. I would keep flying, keep delivering, keep protecting. For as long as the old man paid me, for as long as they needed help. But I also made another decision. I would document everything, record every drop, keep every piece of evidence, create a record that would survive after I was gone. Because someday, someone would need to take over. Someday, I would be too old to fly. Robert Callahan died on March 17, 2024, at the age of 94. I found out 3 days later when his lawyer called me. Mr. Wright, my name is Patricia Hoffman. I am calling regarding the estate of Robert Michael Callahan. He listed you as a beneficiary in his will. We need to schedule a meeting to discuss the terms. I had not even known his full name until that moment. 37 years, 447 drops, nearly $2.25 million in payments. And I had only known him as the old man. Robert Callahan, former wildlife biologist, former National Park Service researcher, former government consultant, the man who had been protecting Bigfoot for 6 decades. The meeting was on March 24th at a law office in Fairbanks. Me a thick envelope and a key. Mr. Callahan left you access to a storage unit in North Pole, Alaska. Unit 247. Everything inside belongs to you now. He also left instructions that I am required to read to you. She opened a sealed letter and read aloud, Daniel, if you are hearing this, I am gone. You have been flying for me for 37 years. You have saved more lives than you know. The storage unit contains everything. Records, research, evidence. What you do with it is now your decision. They trust you. Do not betray that trust unless you believe the world is finally ready. The choice is yours. Robert. The storage unit was climate controlled. When I unlocked it, I found 60 years of documentation, filing cabinets, dozens of them, organized by year. Starting in 1964, journals, handwritten field notes, thousands of pages, photographs, hundreds of them, clear, detailed. Bigfoot, in various locations across Alaska, different individuals, different ages, medical records, diagnoses, treatment plans, drug dosages calculated for body weights ranging from 400 to 800 pounds, maps, GPS, coordinates for multiple colonies across Alaska, British Columbia, Washington, Oregon, Montana. Not just one colony. Multiple populations, all hidden, all monitored, all receiving medicine, in video recordings, VHS tapes from the 1980s, DVDs from the 1990s and 2000s, digital files from recent years, footage of Bigfoot interacting with humans, accepting medicine, allowing medical treatment, learning sign language, communication in some cases. Robert Callahan had not been running a secret operation. He had been running a covert medical program for an endangered species that officially did not exist. For 60 years. His journals explained everything. He had been a wildlife biologist working for the National Park Service in 1964 when he encountered his first Bigfoot in Denali. Not a brief sighting, a sustained observation. He had watched a family group for 3 days from a concealed position. He documented their behavior, their tool use, their language-like vocalizations, their social structure. He reported his findings to his superiors. They classified the report immediately. National security. The official position was that Bigfoot did not exist and would never exist in government records. Acknowledging them would create chaos, panic, legal complications about land rights and endangered species protections that would halt logging, mining, and development across millions of acres. So the government chose denial, but Robert chose protection. He spent the next 6 decades documenting Bigfoot populations, studying their biology, learning their medical needs, and quietly, without official support, keeping them alive. By the 19th, he noticed the populations were declining. Isolated groups, habitat loss, climate change affecting their food sources, winter temperatures dropping lower, making survival harder, injuries from increased human encroachment into remote areas. Bigfoot was dying out, slowly, quietly, and no one was doing anything, because officially, Bigfoot did not exist. So Robert did something. He started medicine drops. At first, he flew them himself. Small single-engine plane. Remote coordinates. Monthly deliveries during winter, when Bigfoot activity was concentrated around limited food sources. He tracked outcomes. Survival rates improved. Birth rates increased slightly. Elders lived longer. The colony in the Brooks Range stabilized at around 40 to 50 individuals, down from an estimated 200 in the 1950s, but better than the projected extinction by 1990. By 1987, Robert was 57 years old and could not fly safely anymore. So he hired me. He chose me because I was young, capable, and most importantly, I did not ask too many questions. He paid me well to ensure I would not ask questions later, and I did not. Not for 23 years. Not until the forced landing made me finally see what I had been protecting. Robert's final journal entry was dated February 28, 2024, 18 days before he died. I am 94 years old. I have kept this secret for 60 years. I have watched Bigfoot go from thriving populations to scattered remnants. There are maybe 300 left in Alaska, maybe 800 across all of North America. They are functionally extinct. One bad winter, one disease outbreak, one logging operation in the wrong valley, and they are gone forever. I do not know if I made the right choice keeping them secret. Maybe I should have gone public in 1964. Maybe the world would have protected them. Or maybe the world would have hunted them to extinction faster. I will never know. But I know this. Daniel Wright is a good man. He will make the right choice. Whatever that choice is. I spent 2 months reviewing everything in the storage unit, reading 60 years of research, watching decades of footage, understanding the full scope of what Robert had been doing. He had not just been protecting one colony. He had coordinates for drop sites across Alaska, 7 Bigfoot communities, all of them monitored, all of them receiving supplies through a network of bush pilots he had hired over the decades. I was one of 7 pilots, all of us doing the same job, none of us knowing about the others. Robert had been running a distributed medical support system for an entire species, alone, unfunded, unrecognized, for 60 years. And now that responsibility was mine. I am 64 years old. One cannot fly for another 37 years. I cannot do what Robert did. I cannot protect this secret until I die and pass it to someone else who will keep it hidden for another generation. Bigfoot is real. I have proof. Undeniable proof. Thousands of photographs, hours of video, medical records, GPS coordinates, 60 years of documentation. The question is, what do I do with it? If I go public, I risk everything Robert worked for. I risk the Bigfoot colonies being discovered, harassed, displaced. I risk hunters flooding the areas, scientists demanding specimens, government agencies quarantining entire regions. But if I stay silent, I watch them die. Because I cannot maintain 7 medicine drop operations alone. I cannot afford the flights. I cannot coordinate the logistics. I cannot keep this running for another decade. Climate change is making it worse. Winters in Alaska are getting shorter, warmer. The temperature window for safe drops below -40 degrees Fahrenheit, when Bigfoot activity is concentrated and human activity is minimal, has shrunk from 4 months to barely 2 months per year. The timing is collapsing. Bigfoot is running out of time, and I am running out of time to decide. So I am making a choice. The same choice Robert could not make. I am going public, not to exploit them, not to make money, not to become famous, but because they deserve protection. Real protection, legal protection, the kind that comes from the world knowing they exist. This video is the beginning. The evidence will follow. Photographs, video, medical records, GPS coordinates will remain private until protections are in place. But the proof of existence that goes public now, Bigfoot is real. They live in the mountains of Alaska and across North America. They are intelligent, social, and dying. They need medicine. They need habitat protection. They need a world that acknowledges their existence instead of pretending they are legends. I have been protecting them in secret for 37 years. Robert Callahan protected them for 60 years before me. But secret protection is not enough anymore. They need more. They deserve more. If you are watching this, you are now part of the secret. You know Bigfoot exists. You know they are endangered. You know they need help. The question is, what will you do with that knowledge? Will you help protect them? or will you help destroy them? The choice, like Robert said, is yours. September 15th, 2024. My retirement day. I was 68 years old. I'd flown 11,847 hours over 40 years in Alaska. I'd survived 3 engine failures, 2 lightning strikes, and more weather emergencies than I could count. I'd transported miners, scientists, medical patients, supplies, and hope into places where most people would never go. And for 217 of those flights, I'd documented something that officially didn't exist. The retirement ceremony was small. My company doesn't do big productions. Just a gathering in the hangar, some cake, a plaque commemorating my service. About 30 people showed up. Fellow pilots, mechanics, dispatchers, a few regulars I'd flown over the years. My boss, Karen Reeves, gave a short speech about reliability and professionalism. Tom Hadley, who'd retired 2 years earlier, drove up from Anchorage to be there. Sarah Chen brought her kids, now teenagers, to show them what a real Alaska pilot looks like. They presented me with the plaque, bronze, engraved with my name and years of service. For 40 years of safe flying and dedication to Alaska aviation. Everyone clapped. I smiled, said thank you, told some old stories that got laughs, ate a piece of cake that was too sweet, and the whole time I felt like a fraud. Because the most important thing I'd learned in 40 years, the most significant discovery I'd made, wasn't mentioned at all. Couldn't be mentioned, would never be mentioned in any official capacity. After the ceremony, Tom pulled me aside. We walked out to the tarmac where my Cessna 185 sat, the same aircraft I'd been flying for the last 15 years. You ever going to tell anyone? He asked quietly. I don't know. You've got more documentation than anyone. More sightings, more detail, more years of consistent observation. If anyone's going to break this story, it should be you. And then what? Media circus. Government investigation. That whole region gets flooded with hunters and crypto enthusiasts looking for proof. Tom shrugged. Maybe, or maybe people would actually care. Maybe protections get put in place. Conservation efforts. Habitat preservation. Or maybe they get hunted to extinction within 5 years. We stood there in silence, watching the sun paint the mountains orange and gold. Finally, Tom said, "You're not going to be able to fly out there anymore. You know that, right? No more checking on them. No more documentation. Whatever happens to them now, you won't see it." That thought had been eating at me for months. I was retiring from flying, but I wasn't retiring from caring, and I had no way to keep tabs on them anymore. "Promise me something," Tom said. "Take some time. Think about it. Really think about whether silence is still the right choice. Because you're the only one who's been watching them long enough to understand their behavior, their patterns. If they disappear, that knowledge disappears with you." I promised I'd think about it. That night, I sat in my apartment with 40 years of black notebooks spread across my kitchen table. Hundreds of entries, sketches, maps, temperature charts, behavioral observations. It was the most comprehensive documentation of Bigfoot activity ever compiled. And it was locked in my apartment where no one would ever see it. I opened the first notebook, December 14th, 1984. My first sighting. I was 28 years old, fresh out of the Air Force. The world seemed simpler then. I opened the last notebook, March 2024. My most recent sighting, 7 months ago. A single individual, spotted from 4,000 feet, moving across a ridge in early spring, heading north, always north now, toward colder ground, higher elevations, deeper wilderness. 40 years of watching them retreat. In October 2024, I made a decision. I was going back. One last time. Not in a plane, on the ground, to the exact coordinates where I'd seen them most often. A150.1356W. Where it all started. I told myself I just wanted to see the area from ground level, to understand the terrain from their perspective. But really, I was hoping I might see them one more time. Hoping for some kind of closure, or maybe permission. I hired a helicopter to drop me at the site in early November. The pilot, a young guy named Alex, who'd only been flying Alaska for 2 years, didn't ask too many questions. Just some personal nostalgia. I told him, wanted to visit a place I've been flying over for decades. He dropped me at the Frozen River Valley, where I demade my emergency landing in 2003. ILLB, back in 6 hours, he said. You sure you're good out here alone? I've got everything I need. I watched his helicopter disappear over the ridge. The sound of the rotors fading until there was nothing but wind and silence. The temperature was minus 38 degrees Fahrenheit. Clear skies. No wind. Perfect conditions. The kind of day where I'd always seen them. I hiked up to the ridge. My knees complained the whole way. 60-year-old knees aren't meant for steep slopes and deep snow. But I made it. I stood where I'd seen them stand. Looked down at the valley where I de-landed that day in 2003. Tried to see the world through their eyes. This place was changing. I could see it even from here. The tree line was creeping higher up the mountains. The permafrost was shifting. The river, which should have been frozen solid in early November, had thin ice in spots where meltwater was still flowing underneath. Their world was disappearing. Slowly, incrementally, but unmistakably. I spent 3 hours on that ridge, waiting, watching, listening. They never came. Maybe they knew I was there and chose to stay hidden. Maybe they'd already moved on to territory farther north. Or maybe the population had dwindled to the point where my 5-mile radius no longer contained any of them. I'll never know. As I hiked back down to the pickup point, I found something. A depression in the snow near the tree line. Too large for any normal wildlife. Too deliberate in placement. A bedding spot, maybe. Recent, based on the condition of the snow. Someone had been here. Maybe days ago. Maybe hours. I knelt down next to the depression and placed my hand in the center. The snow was compressed, compacted by weight and body heat. Something large had rested here. I'm sorry, I said out loud, to whoever had made this bed. To whatever had been watching me watch them for 40 years. I'm sorry we couldn't coexist. I'm sorry the world got too small. I'm sorry I stayed silent for so long. The forest didn't answer, but I felt something. Not supernatural, not mystical, just acknowledgement. The way you feel when you're in a place that matters. A place where something important happened, or still happens, even if you can't see it. I took photos of the depression, measured it, documented it in the small notebook I'd brought with me. One last entry, one last piece of evidence. When Alex picked me up 6 hours later, he asked if I'd found what I was looking for. I don't know, I said honestly, but I think I understand now. What I need to do. December 2024. I'm writing this from my apartment in Fairbanks. It's minus 42 degrees Fahrenheit outside. Deep winter. The time when they're most active. Or at least, when they used to be most active. I've spent the last 2 months digitizing my notebooks, scanning every page, uploading everything to encrypted cloud storage, making backup copies on external drives. Organizing the data by date, location, behavior type, temperature, seasonal patterns. It's taken longer than I expected. 40 years of handwritten notes isn't easy to digitize when you're not particularly tech-savvy, but it's done now. All 217 sightings, all the analysis, all the maps, all the sketches, everything. And I've made a decision. I'm going public. Not immediately, not recklessly, but soon. I'm 68 years old. I don't have a career to protect anymore. I don't have a pilot's license that can be revoked. I don't have decades ahead of me to worry about reputation. What I have is documentation, knowledge, evidence, and a responsibility. Because here's what I've realized in these final months. Silence hasn't protected them. Silence has just made them invisible while their habitat disappears. If they go extinct and no one even knows they existed, then their disappearance means nothing. No conservation efforts, no protected habitats, no acknowledgement that something irreplaceable was lost. Maybe going public will make things worse. Maybe hunters will flood the area. Maybe the government will get involved in ways that are harmful. Maybe I'll be ridiculed, dismissed, labeled a crank. But maybe, just maybe, it will matter. Maybe scientists will take the data seriously. Maybe conservation groups will push for habitat protections. Maybe enough people will care that the region gets designated as a preserve, off limits to hunting and development. Maybe my 40 years of documentation will mean something. I've already reached out to a researcher at the University of Alaska, Dr. Jennifer Matsu. She's a primatologist who specializes in great ape behavior and conservation. I sent her a carefully worded email asking if she'd be interested in reviewing unusual wildlife observation data from a recently retired bush pilot. She responded within 24 hours. We're meeting next week. I've also contacted a lawyer. I need to understand the legal implications of what I'm about to do. Can I be prosecuted for failing to report wildlife sightings for 40 years? Can my pilot's license be posthumously revoked, affecting my pension? Can the FAA come after me for falsifying flight reports? The lawyer, a woman named Rebecca Torres, who specializes in environmental law, said probably not. You weren't required to report wildlife sightings, she explained. And you didn't falsify reports. You just omitted information. That's not illegal. She's agreed to represent me if things get complicated. I've thought about what I'll say when I finally tell this story publicly. How to frame it. How to present 40 years of documentation in a way that's credible, verifiable, and respectful to the creatures I've been watching. I don't want this to be a sensational, I saw Bigfoot story. I want it to be a scientific documentation, a conservation call to action. A plea for habitat protection before it's too late. Tom Hadley has agreed to come forward with me. So has Sarah Chen. We're 3 pilots with a combined 110 years of Alaska flying experience, all willing to testify that we've seen something in that wilderness that deserves acknowledgement and protection. That's harder to dismiss than one crazy old pilot with notebooks full of sketches. The meeting with Dr. Matsuda is tomorrow. I'm bringing 5 years' worth of documentation to start. The most detailed observations, the clearest behavioral patterns, the most compelling evidence. I don't know how she'll react, but I'm ready to find out. Tonight, I pulled out a map of Alaska and traced the region where I've made all 217 sightings. 5 square miles. That's it. That's the entire area where I've documented these beings over 40 years. 5 square miles in a state that covers 663,000 square miles. They've compressed themselves into such a small space, hidden so carefully, adapted so completely to invisibility. And even that 5 square miles is changing, warming, transforming into something that might not support them much longer. If I do nothing, I'll spend the rest of my life wondering if I could have made a difference. If my documentation could have saved them. If breaking my silence could have given them a chance. And I can't live with that. I'm not naive. I know this could go badly. I know people might not believe me. I know even if they do believe me, that doesn't guarantee protection or conservation efforts. I know the creatures I've been watching might already be gone. moved so far north, or reduced in numbers so dramatically that my documentation is just a historical record of something extinct. But I have to try, because 40 years ago, on December 14th, 1984, I saw something impossible, and instead of reporting it, I made a choice to protect my career, my reputation, my comfortable life. That choice gave me 40 years of observation, 40 years of learning, 40 years of building the most comprehensive documentation of these beings that probably exists anywhere. Now, it's time to make a different choice. Tomorrow, Dr. Matsuda. Next week, a press conference, if she agrees, the data warrants it. After that, whatever comes. I'm 68 years old. I've kept this secret for 40 years, and I'm finally ready to tell the truth. Not because I want attention, not because I want to be famous, but because silence is no longer protection. Silence is abandonment, and I won't abandon them. Not after they let me watch them for 40 years. Not after they spared me that day in 2003, when I was vulnerable and alone. Not after everything I've learned about their intelligence, their society, their desperate attempt to survive in a world that's leaving them behind. If they're still out there, somewhere in that wilderness I flew over for 4 decades, they deserve better than invisibility. They deserve acknowledgement. They deserve protection. They deserve to exist. And if telling my story, if sharing my documentation, if risking my reputation gives them even the smallest chance of survival, then it's worth it. Tomorrow, everything changes. Tonight, I'm looking at those coordinates one more time. A spot in the wilderness that most people will never visit, never see, never know exists. But I know it exists. And I know what lives there, or at least what used to live there. And soon, the world will know too. I just hope I'm not too late. I hope they're still out there, still watching the sky, still hearing the meadow birds pass overhead, still surviving, somehow, against all the odds. Because if they are, maybe we can help. And if they're not, at least their story will be told. At least someone will remember that they were here, that they were real, that they mattered. 40 years of silence ends tomorrow. For them, for the truth, for whatever time they have left.